Okay, I haven't heard a beep for a couple seconds here of anybody new signing in, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Kate, do you want to talk real quick about how people can submit questions before I start talking?
Yes. I am going to put a link in the chat. So this is just a form similar to what you used when you signed in or registered for this. So pretty straightforward. And so feel free to put your questions in there. You might want to wait a little bit to see if Forrest potentially covers your question, but you can feel free to start putting those in at any time. And then after Forrest kind of goes through an overview and covers some, frequently asked questions he's already heard in other venues, we'll go ahead and share that list so everyone can see it and kind of track, what we've answered and what we haven't, because I know the chat can get a little bit unwieldy. Just so you all know, we have, you can probably see almost 150 people in this meeting. So, I think that should be the most efficient way to make sure we get everybody's questions heard and answered. That will also help us if we get to the end of our hour that we have allocated here and we have not answered specific questions. We are asking you to provide your email address. And so that will allow us then to answer those questions individually over email from staff after the meeting. So please do make sure you put your questions in there, and we will attempt to get to as many as we can during today's meeting, but again, we will see how well we do. Forrest, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Kate. So so Kate's probably mentioned this already, but please make sure you mute yourself. Any background noise is really going to be amplified with the 150 some people we have on this call so far. And if you're having any issues with sound breaking up or your computer, glitching or anything like that, what I've found helpful on these Teams meetings is to turn your camera off sometimes. That helps your bandwidth a little bit. So just some housekeeping. So again, I'm Forrest Decker. I'm the director of the Neighborhood and Community Services Department for the City of Kansas City. And our department is the one going to be administering and going through this whole Rebuild KC grant project. So I'll just talk a little bit about the grant, and then I'll just answer a few questions that I've gotten kind of time and time again from people, and then we'll go into some of your specific questions. So the Rebuild KC grant program, Kate, you might pop the website up if you get a chance there before we talk about the application. This is a new offering from the city to give residents, local organizations, neighborhood groups opportunity to tell us what they need to build better neighborhoods. We'll primarily be using American Rescue Plan Act dollars to fund these grants. We may tap into some other city dollars too, depending on what the requests are and if there's something that's already funded somewhere else in the program or within the city. So what kinds of grants can people apply for? Right off the website, and I'll kind of ad-lib this a little bit. People can apply for housing improvements, affordable housing, unhoused solutions, unhoused projects, infrastructure projects like sidewalks, blight elimination, job creation programs, employment training programs, violence prevention programs, crime prevention initiatives, energy sustainability and efficiency programs. Some examples might be like a tree planting in the neighborhood, solar solutions or alternative energy solutions. And other than that, just anything that promotes neighborhood resiliency or activities that promote healthy communities. As I said, the program will be administered by Neighborhood Services Department, but it will be a multi-departmental review looking over these grants. So we'll have a wide range of folks looking over the applications. The deadline is February 22nd, so it's next week, coming up pretty quick. Before I answer any questions, I guess, why don't we pop the application back up? We can look at that really quick. The application, the link is on the website, and Kate might pop it into the chat too, just in case anybody doesn't have it, but it is on the KC Rebuild website. It's a pretty simple application. I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, but if you go to it, it's really more of a questionnaire. It doesn't get into wanting you to necessarily upload a very detailed budget, although we do ask you to upload cost estimates and things like that. The biggest part of it is the sections where you describe your project and you talk about how this project will benefit the community. That's the most important section as far as I'm concerned on here. I mean, obviously there's things like your contact information, we need an email, we need a phone number, we need a way to get a hold of you, things like that. Any partnerships that you're proposing as far as this, any stakeholders that are involved, any other assistance, but be very specific in how you describe the project and how this project will benefit the community. All grant applications must have a community benefit of some sort. So some of the questions, more common questions that I've received are, well, the grant deadline, which is February 22nd. What kinds of projects does it fund? I kind of went over that already. And when would the project start? That's been a big question too. So we don't anticipate any funding for this program to start until our fiscal year, which is May 1st. But that doesn't give us a whole long time between the deadline and May 1st to evaluate the applications, to reach out with additional questions that we may have, potentially do some in-person interviews to talk about the program, just to gain more clarity about it and things like that. So I think that's all I really have just kind of for an introduction. I think I'd be ready to go into the question and answer period. Kate, do you have anything else to add that I may have forgotten?
Nope, I don't think so. We already have some questions that are coming in. So I'm actually going to move these over here so that this will allow everyone to actually see the questions in case, because I'm sure some of them are shared. And we've had a few that come in via the chat too. So you can see multiple questions in some of these. So total funds allotted. Do you want to speak to that, Forrest?
Yeah, I can. If I look away, I'm sorry, from the camera here, I've got like 3 screens going here, so I'm trying to blow these up so I can actually read them. What else? Oh, so also, if we don't get to all the questions during the time we have allotted for this today, with your question submittal, I believe you have to provide an email on there. We will email these back, and there are quite a few other city staff on here besides just myself, so we may kind of divide up the questions a little bit depending on the areas of expertise needed to answer them. So just wanted to throw that out there too. So yeah, first question, total funds allotted. So what we're anticipating is around $10 million to be allotted for this. Now the city count, that's why we're not awarding these until after May 1st, because the city council can certainly add or subtract to those dollar funds, but we're anticipating in the $10 million range. Some other questions on that same line. Do certain areas have advantages? No, I will say, we don't have any priority areas outside of what is listed on the website. The most important thing, as I've said before, is that the program or the project have a public benefit, defined public benefit. Limits on funding requests. There is no specific limit on a funding request. I've kept track of the applications coming in so far, which we have about 100 already. And the project requests range from $800 to $3 million. Now, obviously with $10 million, we're not going to fund a whole bunch of $3 and $5 million requests, but there's no limit. And that's where, we'll, for some of the higher anticipated projects, we'll go into a little more detail than is on the application on the website. That's where we'll have to get into some follow-up questions and some follow-up interviews and things like that. So Kate, do you just want me to kind of go down this list? Is that the best way?
Yeah, since you're kind of on way. And then as you get through those, I also I've got a few others coming in via chat that I'm pulling in. It looks like there's a number of questions also about the letters of support. Several people asking, can you submit more than that? What are the letters of support supposed to have? So maybe that one,
Okay.
and then go back to the list.
Okay. Yeah, and I see that that's actually on the list. So talk about letters of support. So what are we looking for there? So they're letter, just any letter that you would get from a supporting organization that supports what you're proposing. So a not-for-profit group, another government entity, a neighborhood association, a local business that, you know, will have something to do with your project, I guess. Maybe they're a partnership funder, maybe they're not, maybe they're just support what you're asking for. And an example I would use is if, you know, you're applying for tree planting funds, you know, money to plant some trees in your neighborhood, clean up your neighborhood. You know, you might look for a letter of support from one of the many environmental groups in the city, Sierra Club or Bridging the Gap or somebody like that, Department of Conservation. Those are just examples, of course, but, you know, just letters that support what you're asking for, and lend credence to maybe the need of what you're asking for and how it is important. So, so I'll go back to the list here of questions, which there's quite a few on there. I hope we can get through a lot of them in an hour, but we will certainly try. Question about floor or ceiling for the anticipated awards. I kind of covered that. There's no, you know, bottom dollar that people can ask for. There's no maximum amount. We'll just have to evaluate those as they come in. How many awards are anticipated? That will depend solely upon how many awards or how many grant requests we get and how much funding we have. So like I said, right now we have 100 applications. If everyone on this call puts in an application, that's another 167 right now. So we'll see how many how many applications we ultimately get. But yeah, it will depend somewhat on funding. We hope to award as many as we can, but we don't have a specific, you know, we're only going to award 3 or 4 grants. It's not like that at all.
Forrest, a couple other questions related to funding. A couple of people have asked about are partial awards a potential if the full amount can't be accommodated? Others have asked, are there matching funds required?
So yes and no. Yes, we could award partial funds. Is something that we would work out in a conversation with the applicant or in some follow-up questions. I mean, if it's a kind of a program or a project where, you know, you need a certain amount or you just can't do it at all, we'll have to take that into account. But if it's something that can be staged over, you know, several years or over several grant cycles or something like that, then we could do a partial award. That'll be evaluated depending on the application on an individual basis. What was the second part there? Are matching funds required? No, they're not required, but they would, you know, would certainly strengthen an application if there are some partnerships that involve some kind of a match, funding or labor, you know, or, you know, volunteer hours, things like that. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily be money to be matching. It can be some sort of service in lieu of funding.
Some other people have asked, will a proposal without a budget, if a budget's not available, or if it's not a firm estimate yet, or if you don't have a start date, you know, is it possible that your project would still be considered?
Yes, it will be. Some of the projects I've seen come in, or some of the proposals I've seen come in, it's probably really difficult to apply a specific budget to it. Let me think of an example there. So, you know, some of the infrastructure projects that people have asked for, curbs, sidewalks, things like that. I wouldn't expect somebody to come up with a precise budget for that, because that is a type of project that the city would most likely bid along with other projects. So we would come up with what that ultimately ended up costing, and we would probably get a better price than anybody would anyway. So just because of the sheer scale of infrastructure programs that we do. So no, a specific budget is not required. if if it's something that you just can't come up with a budget on or a specific cost on. So.
And that answers another question, which was about is curb or road funding a potential grant type? And that, so you said, yeah, we've already gotten some requests. We also had one about, will creative industries such as musicians, events, education programs be considered? I think that potentially could be under the scope, from my understanding.
Yes, it certainly could if there's a community benefit. Some things like the example you just gave of an event or something. We do have other city programs that fund that type of a proposal as well. We have the NTDF, the Neighborhood Tourism Development Fund. So we may divert some of those to other programs, kind of out of this one, but this is a good mechanism to go ahead and submit your initial grant. At least it lets us know, that you're interested in that type of event, and maybe there's other funding sources that you don't know about that we can leverage along with this program.
And that goes to another related question, which is several people have asked about specifically rebuild versus PIAC. So what type of infrastructure projects would go in either bucket? Do you have any insight about that?
Kind of, and that's a tricky question. So, infrastructure projects are allowed under this program. It could be the same kind of infrastructure programs or projects that someone would apply for under PIAC, but maybe there wasn't enough PIAC dollars to fund it, or maybe it's a more urgent need than what the PIAC process would address. So the same types of projects could be applied for here.
We have a couple questions that are related to, has any of this been granted already, and a reference to, a public list showing funds that have been awarded as of December 31st. Can you speak to that, about whether any funding has already been allocated from this for this grant program?
None of the funds set aside for the Rebuild KC grant program have been awarded yet. We've received we've received applications. We haven't evaluated any applications yet, and won't begin doing so until after the February 22nd deadline. So no, none of these projects have been allocated yet, or none of these funds.
So. Several people have asked, is there limitations on the number of requests that you can put in, an individual and organization?
No, there's not, and I'll kind of add to that a little bit based on a few questions I've had. If your organization wants to submit multiple project or program grant requests, I would suggest submitting a separate one for each one. I've had a few people ask me if they should try to cram 2 or 3 or 4 different projects all on the same application, and I would prefer that you not do that. I would prefer that you fill out a separate application for each individual program or project.
Several people asking if it could specific uses of funds. So could you ask for general operating funds as part of the proposal?
Yes, you could. Some programs like for example, a job training program. I mean, that would be mostly operating funds, I would assume. So, yeah, we've tried to make this as general and as wide open as possible, because we really want to use this as a tool to see what neighborhoods and community organizations need to be successful. So, if that's what you tell us you need to be successful, that's something that we need to know, and we need to evaluate.
We've also had people ask about, could this be used as a part of a PIAC match? Could be used to support a PIAC match, these funds? You might not know have the answer to that.
I don't know I don't know a definitive answer to tell you on that one right away. That might be one we set aside and we address back through an email, or post it up on a frequently asked questions on the board or something. So that's the first I've heard that question. So let's ponder that one a little bit. So okay. I apologize to whoever asked it.
Questions about national organizations with a KC presence can apply. It's not limited to KC, correct?
No, it's not limited to a KC organization necessarily, but the project or the program must occur in Kansas City and must be in Kansas City. But an outside of Kansas City organization could apply.
Is this the question about, is this really a letter of interest or the entire proposal? There may be a follow-up component of this, correct? In
Yes,
terms of
yeah.
information.
You know, some really simple projects or programs, you know, this short application that we have can probably encompass it. But, you know, a lot of them that I've looked through, yeah, we'll have follow-up questions. We're actually developing a list of follow-up questions right now that we will need to ask certain applicants. So yeah, if you have a large ask or a complicated ask, there will be more after this. There will be more questions and potentially even an in-person conversation about it. So.
A couple of these that I think I know the answer to, but you correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, to use the same letters of support if we submit different applications, I would assume yes if they're relevant to each.
Yes.
Is a 501c3 required? No. Open to individuals and businesses.
Yep.
KC specific for the Missouri side only, yes, and Kansas City, Missouri. So not just Missouri side, but Kansas City, Missouri, specifically. Okay.
Correct.
A couple other questions about, someone asked if this would be by when the grant dollars should be spent and whether this is a reimbursement grant.
So yeah, so we asked as part of the application that projects that could be completed in 1 year, but we are flexible about that. If it's a program or a project that is longer than a year or is more ongoing, you know, way past a year, I still encourage you to apply, and we'll have to evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. What was the second part of that question, Kate?
I said the amount of time you need to spend, and then is it a reimbursement-based grant?
Oh, is it a reimbursement? So it can be a reimbursement. There could be funds provided up front. That again, that depends on the type of application. If there are startup costs that need to be realized, something like that, where we advance funds, or we have a bigger or a longer type of project or program, we will also be going through the city's contracting process. We won't just be writing checks to people. There will have to be a contract in place that obligates the city and the applicant to certain actions. So there's a potential for money prior to a reimbursement, depending on the program.
Several people have asked if there will be money, if this money will be allocated in the future, if it's a one-time source.
So initially this is a one-time thing. These are ARP funds. We're getting those this year. We will not be getting those in future years. However, I will caveat that by saying, if this program demonstrates success and, and a lot of neighborhood improvements, and it just works really, really well, for example, I would anticipate that we would try to continue this in future years.
There've been several questions.
Funding sources. Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Several questions about reporting. So will there be a reporting requirement in the grant? Will there be reports on an ongoing basis? Will you have to show proof of how funds were spent, receipts, that type of thing?
Yes. So there will be a reporting process. I mean, some smaller, simpler projects that may just be an end report. It may be something that doesn't take very long, and there's no point in having interim reports within the process. A longer project or any type of construction-based project that we give any type of funds away for, there will have to be interim progress reports. Any funds that are spent, yes, there will have to be proof of how those funds were spent.
Someone asked, what is the city council's role in determining these allocations?
So the city council will approve these grants in the end. I mean, we will evaluate them. We will make a recommendation to the city council, and the city council will approve them, I assume, as a package. not individually, although they may have questions about individual programs or individual applications. But the city council will ultimately approve all funds dispersed.
A couple of people I think also have asked, will the information on the application and the ideas be available for the public to see? I think there is a desire to share out information about applications, not private information, obviously, but the types of applications. Someone mentioned if something is seen but not funded, could it be it could be funded by someone else?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought of that, and I see that question came from my good friend Carl Stafford. But yeah, so yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I guess I don't see an issue with that. I mean, it could be construed as public information as long as we redacted personal information. So that's something we should consider that.
Several people have asked, are city departments or boards or commissions eligible to apply?
Yes, they are. Both.
And then a couple of people have asked about additional criteria, scoring considerations, maybe to talk a little bit. I think some of that is on the web page, which I can bring back over. Well, it's kind of broad. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to there.
Yeah, so we're developing the scoring matrix basically. We don't have a scoring matrix in place yet. So.
Several people have asked about if you do submit more than one, is it possible to give a sense of your order of priority or anything like that?
Yeah, so I've had that question asked a few times. What I would say to that is if an organization submits multiple applications and due to, dollars available or whatever, we cannot fund all of them, we will reach out to that organization to see what their priority is. I don't think you need to necessarily put that on your application. I guess you could, say something in your description of, like this is project 1 of 3. This is project, 2 of 3 or something like that if you want to rank them. But anytime we get multiple applications from the same organization, I think we're going to have a conversation with that applicant.
We had a question, with city departments apply, will they be required to show support by the neighborhood impacted?
That's another good question I hadn't heard yet. I would think that would be a good idea. Yeah.
Someone asked about if for curbs projects, this would probably apply to other infrastructure too. Will the city administer the project, not the neighborhood? So I would think for anything that is city infrastructure related, yes, that it would not be.
Yeah, the city would administer any infrastructure type projects. We have standards, design standards and build standards for, roads, curbs, sidewalks, culverts, anything like that, speed humps, any of those types of requests that would come in. And we would use these requests to leverage other projects at the same time. So yeah, we would administer those. If somebody requests a trail connector, for example, I've seen a couple questions on that, or a couple of applications for trail connectors. It's unlikely that we would cut a check to the neighborhood to build that trail connector. We would build it as part of one of our construction contracts.
A couple of people have asked, can the grant be used to assist in operating recovery homes within the metropolitan area? Well, it would have to be within KCMO, but that specific use is.
Yeah, that would be a viable application. Absolutely.
I also saw a question about can startup businesses apply? So yes, that would be feasible.
Yep. As long as there's a community or a public good. I'll keep throwing that out there.
When you talked about developing the scoring conditions, someone asked if those were going to be published so that when they are developed.
They could be. I hadn't thought that far ahead, to be honest. So that'd be one we can address later.
Let's see. What else have we not covered here? If you've been putting them in the chat, I've been pulling those out as well and kind of cross-referencing them. So just an FYI, and we still have a while left to go. So we may get to hopefully all of them, but if by the end you don't feel like your question's been answered, please make sure you are putting it in that form, because otherwise we don't have any way to get back to you with the answer. So
Okay, I see one question on here. Did I say that some applications have already been submitted? Yes. As soon as we put this out there, we started getting some applications. I didn't look today, but as of yesterday, we had over 100 applications already.
Yeah.
We'll continue to accept them right up until midnight on February 22nd.
Someone asked about prioritizing smaller dollar applications over large dollar. Is that the case? I mean, I don't think that has not been determined, correct?
We wanted to really see the range and the scope of applications that we get before we try to prioritize small versus medium versus large. We really didn't necessarily have a specific idea of what type and what size of applications we would get. So we didn't develop any prioritization up front. Once we get them all, we'll do some analysis on the grants overall, and we may end up, prioritizing some small, some medium, some large. It'll just kind of depend on how many applications we get and what their dollar amounts are.
People have asked, can you address our salary and operating costs can be covered? I think yes was the answer to that. That's a potential use. Can filler funds be building improvements? Yes, that's a potential use. A couple of people have asked, can extra time be allotted to get letters of support? My understanding is that's not a required component of the request. So, but it may be requested at a future point in time.
Yeah, you could certainly submit the application without letters of support, and if you get them after the fact, you can send them to us at that point. But it's not required by the 22nd. It would be appreciated, but it's not required.
And did you answer? I can't recall if we asked. Can you submit more than 3 letters of support?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Talk to a number of projects, general operating expenses. Yeah, applications that are cooperative between multiple entities allowed, where funding would be split. Yes. This says talks about should projects be grouped in submission, and I think your answer was you prefer separate applications for separate projects.
Yeah, we definitely would. Yeah, there's not a lot of space on that application form to try to make sense of putting multiple projects, multiple programs, and us being able to differentiate those very easily. So I would just appreciate separate applications.
Question about if the neighborhood's submitting an application, can it submit one of the letters of support indicating the project application has been approved by / discussed with membership? I think that would be appropriate information.
Helpful. Yep, that would be very helpful.
Is the city required to award all available funding during the upcoming fiscal year? Or could the city decide not to award all of the funding available?
Yes, the city certainly could decide that. It is our intention to award all the funding, though.
This is a good question. Does midnight mean midnight on February 22nd or midnight that day, the night before, basically?
Okay, it would mean on the 22nd, on February 22nd, when it hits midnight that night, that's when it'll cut off. So
on the end of day on the 22nd.
End of day on the 22nd, yes.
Questions here about will projects that impact multiple neighborhoods be given more priority? I mean, I think that those criteria are still in development.
Yeah, I mean, one of the goals of this program, though, is to build those partnerships between neighborhoods in the private sector, between neighborhoods in the public sector. So partnerships are strongly encouraged.
There's been a question about examples of how home improvements could fit into this, improvements for the community.
Yeah, so I have seen quite a few applications for home improvements. And I'm not really sure how we're going to evaluate those individually. We may, one idea, and this isn't set in stone, so don't quote me specifically on this, but one idea is to kind of lump those and figure out a way or determine a way to address them as a whole. But one of the criteria is that it still does have to have a public good. So if there's a nuisance property, for example, and it's just an example, but a property that's had a lot of nuisance issues, but the owner can't address those for economic reasons or whatever other reasons, I would anticipate that we would try to lump those and address those kind of as a whole with an organization rather than individually. But that's right. Like I said, don't quote me on that. That's not determined yet. We're going to have to kind of go through those applications and see exactly what the scope of them are.
A couple other questions. Somebody asked, this is a technical question about whether you could revise the form. I'm going to say I'm pretty sure you can, but I would recommend if you're having any issues with that to go ahead and put that in on the form that we put in, so we have your email address and can correspond with you about that. Someone asked if there's a limit or ratio on funding for similar projects. There's no buckets. There's no established buckets of certain amounts for certain. So there may end up being, but it is not predetermined. Because I think that was the flexibility, correct?
Yes.
Limits to where the work could take place, who owns the land. It could be done on private property, correct, Forrest?
It could be done on private property as long as they can demonstrate a community benefit or something.
Right, or public
and for the public good, yes.
People have asked about uploading supporting documentation other than letters of support and budgetary information. I would think you could submit. I mean, feasible. Could probably, if there's not, probably put it under the letter of support option. If you have related, Forrest.
Yeah, absolutely. I was pulling up the application here while we're talking real quick too.
I just saw someone asked if the recording would be made available. Yes, it will be. And we're hoping to get that up this afternoon. So
yeah, I believe we're just going to post this as a link on the website, correct? On the KC webpage.
Yes, it will be posted in the same place. Yes. The question about if there is ongoing questions or need for follow-up, again, I would recommend that you put any questions you feel like haven't been answered into the form, which I will drop in the link again, or in the chat again. But they also asked about phone number or email address for contact. Is that on the website for us?
I do not see a phone number or a website on their phone number and email. I don't see one on there. No. So do we want to provide an email address?
I think that was the question. Yeah. About.
Okay. So, people have figured out my email address and I've been getting a lot of emails. So I certainly don't mind up until the 22nd continuing to get more. So yeah, you can feel free to put my email address in. You could post that in the chat, I think, Kate. So.
Yeah. And someone asked about posting this form. Yeah. So questions could be submitted through there. I think that's probably a good idea.
Okay. Yeah. You'll put a link to it.
Mm-hmm. So we can add that link as well.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just scanning through. Someone asked about, yeah, I think that we've covered a lot of these. In the application form, what are examples of other considerations? I'm not sure if you have the application open for us,
Other considerations. I don't see anything on the application titled other considerations. There's a section that, is there any other information about your project you'd like to share?
Mm-hmm.
There is a question on that. anything that you didn't cover in one of the specific questions beforehand, that's just
Yeah, we do have,
extra space for you to add on.
if there's, if your project is selected for further consideration, you will be asked to provide additional information. That
Yes.
there follow-up, a follow-up element here.
Yeah, there will be follow-up on most of the applications. All right, I'm kind of scanning through. I haven't noticed any that we didn't answer in one way or another already.
Someone's asked if a project consists of a purchase from a business for your project, can you submit an application?
So like if somebody is purchasing like supplies from a business or something like that, that would be, yeah, that would be an operating expense.
When will interviewing begin, or I guess the next steps? When would you anticipate the next steps would happen?
So the next step will be, we will begin evaluating these, on probably the 23rd, right after the deadline. As far as interviewing anyone or sending any additional questions and everything, I mean, that'll be kind of an ongoing process, starting on as early as that week right after the applications are due. So I don't have a specific time frame saying that we're going to do interviews on this date or anything. We will follow up after the applications are due.
Someone asked if there would be rolling notification of approval or denial.
There will be rolling questions and follow-ups afterwards. But what I would anticipate is that we will try to take the entire package to the council all at once. One thing I want to try to avoid, if possible, is going to the city council multiple times for them to approve these grants. So at some point, we will get to a point when we have asked all the follow-up questions, we've worked out, any details that weren't included in the application. We've done any interviews that we need to do, and I would anticipate that we would award these all at once. Now that could change, with the number of applications that we get. We may end up having to take this to council in a couple different tranches, but my goal is to try to take it to council all in one chunk.
Someone asked if funding is used for construction, do Davis-Bacon rules apply?
We're gonna fall back up on that because I'm not up at all my Davis-Bacon rules. So keep that aside, and we'll respond back to that one.
I know you said there weren't geographic priorities, but do you have goal or population priorities like addressing or preventing homelessness, or et cetera, which I think those are covered in the list, correct, of which projects does it fund?
Yes.
So those would be, it's fairly broad. There's quite a few in there, right?
Right.
Housing, infrastructure, sustainability. Yeah, pretty broad, but quite a few.
Yep.
Someone kind of returning to the question about the difference between these infrastructure projects and PIAC. I mean, I don't know that there is a real clear line, right, between those.
No, there's not. We'll have to evaluate those projects that come in that could cross that line as we review them. So.
Someone asked, can you purchase a building from a private individual to be used for a center for the neighborhood? Yes, I think that would be yep. Allowable. Yeah, the public benefit, the community benefit that you come back to is really the common theme across all of these, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
Would it be extra meaningful to receive a letter of support from our council members?
Well, if they provide a letter of support, they may have to exclude themselves from voting at that point, depending on what the relationship is. So, I would certainly feel free to ask your council folks if they are willing to provide one. And then they'll have to determine if that would cause a conflict of interest of any kind. So.
If you have a yearly event where you typically apply and receive NTVF funding, would it be possible to also get funding from this program for the coming year? Which I know you oversee NTVF as well, so.
Yes. So no, I mean, we'd have to be really careful there about double dipping. I mean, we shouldn't fund the same project from NTDF or the same program from NTDF and then fund it again from Rebuild KC.
And timeline for when these funds may be awarded. I think maybe the month of May was mentioned, question mark.
Yeah, that's our goal. I mean, we won't be able to, you know, spend any of these funds till after the new fiscal year starts May 1st. But yeah, I would anticipate taking them to council possibly before May 1, with just a caveat that the funds are available after May 1. But definitely before the end of the month of May is out. So.
And the follow-up. So that's a hard no on NTDF and these funds combined, just to be clear.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a hard no on them being combined. Now, you can't ask for funding for the exact same activity. But as part of the NTDF application, and we're getting off into another program here a little bit now, but on the NTDF application, it does require you to divulge any other funds that you receive. So if you're receiving any rebuild funds and then you apply for NTDF in the next award cycle on that, you would need to divulge that you had received these funds. And yeah, since my department oversees both, I will probably know that you did receive rebuild funds.
And I think this sounds like this might be related to an application that's already received, and is whether they should apply, basically. But like you said, it can't be a double coverage situation, but if it was
right,
different portions, or
it could potentially fund a different part of the event if you applied. It all depends on how the NTDF, on what was applied for in the NTDF application. Somebody just asked, what does NTDF stand for? Neighborhood Tourism Development Fund. It's a separate grant fund that the city operates, funded out of hotel sales tax funds.
So about, going back to infrastructure and PIAC, would you consider this to be a PIAC bonus? I think that was one of the questions that you said you'd probably need follow up on, about whether these could be considered PIAC matching funds, correct?
Yeah, I need to look into that further. Nobody had asked that before, and I really hadn't thought of it. So we'll have to respond back to that.
Okay. And I just put a link in there to the NTDF webpage, and I think earlier someone else had put in a link for PIAC. So
okay, awesome
information out there about other city grant programs.
Very good.
I think one thing for the PIAC, from my understanding, is that, if something is not, maybe there's been an application to PIAC or it hasn't been funded in the past, I mean, that it could potentially be eligible for this, right? This could be because
correct.
There's not. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, did we get through everything?
I mean,
8 minutes early, 7 minutes early.
I'm sure that there's some things that the people maybe don't feel were answered, but looking through, I'm not seeing anything really stand out. So as not yet answered. So yeah, like I said, if you have additional questions, I'll drop in the link one more time to the form. And I think it's a great idea to get that posted as well, so we can track responses. And we will, again, if you didn't hear, we will get this recording posted and make sure a link's available from the Rebuild website. But thank you, everyone who's joined. This has been this had just a crazy amount of interest and response. So it's great to see so many people joining.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for showing their interest in this program. We hope to make it a big success so that we can lobby to continue it after the first year. So that's great. I appreciate all your participation.
All right. Well, I think we will go ahead and sign off and move forward in the process. Thanks for your time today, Forrest.
Thank you very much.
Bye all.